The birthday cake sat untouched on the dining room table, its 17 pink candles slowly dripping wax onto the pristine white frosting. Around it, gift bags and colorful wrapping paper lay scattered like the remnants of a celebration that had died before it truly began. But it wasn't the ruined party decorations that made my hands shake as I stared at the envelope in my daughter's trembling fingers. It was the 4 words she had just spoken that shattered my world completely. "You're not my mother." I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning had started like any other birthday in the Patterson household. I woke up at 6:30, just as I had for the past 17 years, and padded downstairs to begin preparing what had become our sacred tradition. Chocolate chip pancakes shaped like hearts, fresh orange juice, and a single red rose placed beside Emma's plate. The kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of sizzling batter and the gentle hum of the coffee maker, while outside, the October morning painted our suburban Chicago neighborhood in shades of amber and gold. Emma had always been my early bird, just like me. Even as a toddler, she would appear at the top of the stairs at exactly 7:15, her dark curls messy from sleep, ready to tackle whatever adventure the day might bring. This morning should have been no different, except when 7:15 came and went, then 7:30, then 8 o'clock, Emma's chair remained empty. I climbed the stairs to her room, expecting to find her buried under blankets, perhaps staying up too late the night before, texting her friends about today's party plans. Instead, I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, fully dressed in jeans and a sweater, staring at her phone with an expression I had never seen before. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her usually bright green eyes seemed distant and troubled. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said softly, settling beside her on the bed. "Pancakes are ready downstairs." She looked up at me then, and something in her gaze made my stomach clench. It was as if she was seeing me for the first time, studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "Mom," she began, then stopped herself. "I mean, Sarah." The way she said my name like it was foreign on her tongue sent a chill down my spine. "Emma, what's wrong? You're scaring me." She held up her phone, and I could see she had been scrolling through old photos. Pictures from when she was little, family vacations, school events, normal memories that any teenager might browse through on their birthday. "I was looking through these last night," she said quietly. "Really looking, you know? And I started noticing things." "What kind of things?" Emma stood up and walked to her dresser, pulling out a small mirror. She held it up next to a photo on her phone, a picture of me from her kindergarten graduation. "Look at us, Mom. Really look." I studied our reflections. Emma had inherited my late husband David's thick dark hair and olive complexion, while I had always been fair-skinned with light brown hair that had started going gray in my 30s. But that was normal, wasn't it? Children often looked more like one parent than the other. "Emma, I don't understand what you're getting at." "Your eyes are hazel, Dad's were brown, mine are green, bright green. Neither of you have green eyes." My heart began to race, though I tried to keep my voice calm. "Honey, genetics can be complicated. Sometimes traits skip generations or—" "That's not all." She scrolled to another photo, this one from her 13th birthday party. "Remember when I got really sick that year, when I needed the blood transfusion?" I remember that terrifying week in the hospital all too well. Emma had contracted a severe case of mononucleosis that had led to complications with her spleen. The doctors had needed to perform an emergency procedure. The hospital needed blood type information from the family. You're type A, Dad was type O, but I'm type AB. I looked it up last night, Mom. 2 parents with type A and type O blood cannot have a child with type AB blood. It's genetically impossible. The room seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of her dresser, trying to process what she was saying. "Emma, there must be some mistake. Maybe the hospital got the records wrong, or—" There's more. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper now. She pulled out a manila envelope from her backpack, one I had never seen before. She found this in Dad's office last week when she was looking for her old yearbooks. It was hidden in the back of his filing cabinet behind all the insurance papers. With shaking hands, she pulled out a birth certificate. But it wasn't the one I'd always kept in our family documents. This one looked different, older somehow, and as I read the details, my blood turned to ice. The baby's name was listed as Emma Catherine Morrison, not Emma Catherine Patterson. The mother's name was listed as Jennifer Morrison. The father's name was blank. The hospital was listed as St. Mary's Medical Center in Portland, Oregon, not Chicago Memorial, where I distinctly remember giving birth to Emma. "This can't be right," I whispered, staring at the document. "Emma, this has to be some kind of mistake, a clerical error. You were born here in Chicago. I remember everything about that day. I remember holding you for the first time, counting your tiny fingers and toes." Emma was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "Then explain this, Mom. Explain why Dad had a birth certificate with a completely different mother's name hidden in his office. Explain why my blood type is impossible. Explain why I don't look anything like either of you." I tried to think back to those early days after Emma was born. David and I had been trying to have children for years before she came into our lives. I remember the fertility treatments, the disappointments, the mounting stress on our marriage. And then suddenly, miraculously, I was pregnant. David had been so excited, so relieved. He had handled all the paperwork, all the hospital arrangements. He had told me he wanted to take care of everything so I could just focus on staying healthy and carrying our baby. But now, staring at this birth certificate, fragments of memories began to surface. Memories I had pushed aside over the years because they didn't fit the narrative I had built in my mind. The way David had been secretive about the hospital visits toward the end of my pregnancy. The way he had insisted we move from our apartment in Lincoln Park to the house in the suburbs just a month after Emma was born, claiming he wanted a fresh start for our new family. The way he had been so adamant about handling all of Emma's early medical appointments himself. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, reaching for her hands. "Whatever this document means, whatever questions you have about your birth, it doesn't change the fact that I have loved you and raised you for 17 years. You are my daughter in every way that matters." She pulled her hands away from mine. "But am I really? Or have you been lying to me my entire life?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "I have never lied to you about anything, Emma. If there's something about your birth that I don't understand, then we'll figure it out together. But you have to believe me when I tell you that, as far as I know, you are my biological daughter." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Then prove it." "What do you mean?" "I want to take a DNA test, a paternity test. If you're really my mother, then you won't have any problem proving it." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Part of me wanted to refuse, to insist that our bond didn't need to be validated by some laboratory test. But another part of me, a part that had been growing more uneasy with each revelation Emma had shared, knew that she deserved answers. "Okay," I said finally. "If that's what you need to feel secure about our relationship, then we'll do the test." Emma nodded, but I could see that my agreement hadn't brought her the relief I had hoped for. If anything, she looked more troubled than before. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I haven't told you yet." My heart, which had finally started to slow down, began racing again. "What is it?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a social media profile. The picture showed a woman who looked to be in her late 30s, with striking green eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was smiling at the camera, holding a young boy who appeared to be around 10 years old. "Her name is Jennifer Morrison," Emma said. "She lives in Portland, Oregon. She has a son named Michael, and according to her profile, she had a daughter named Emma, who she gave up for adoption 17 years ago." I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. The woman did have Emma's eyes, the same unusual shade of green that had always made my daughter stand out in family photos. Emma, where did you find this? I've been searching online for weeks, ever since I started noticing the inconsistencies. I hired one of those people search services with my babysitting money. It wasn't that hard to find her once I had the name from the birth certificate. Have you have you contacted her? Emma shook her head. I wanted to talk to you first. I wanted to give you a chance to explain, but Mom, I need to know the truth. I need to know who I really am. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I looked at my daughter, this girl I had raised from infancy, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had chased away, whose achievements I had celebrated as if they were my own, and realized that I might not know the truth either. The David I loved and married, the man who had been so eager to become a father, might have kept secrets from me that were only now coming to light. Emma, I said carefully, if we're going to do this, if we're going to search for answers, we need to be prepared for whatever we might find. Are you ready for that? She nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. I have to know, Mom. I can't keep living with these questions. I pulled her into my arms then, holding her tight against my chest, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. For a moment, we were just mother and daughter again, the way we had been every morning for the past 17 years. Whatever we find out, I whispered into her hair, you will always be my Emma. Nothing can change that. But even as I said the words, I wondered if they were true. If Emma wasn't my biological daughter, if David had somehow deceived us both, would our relationship survive the revelation? And more importantly, who was the woman in Portland who might have a better claim to the title of Emma's mother than I did? The birthday pancakes grew cold on the kitchen table as we sat in Emma's room holding each other and preparing for a journey that would either confirm the bond we had always shared or destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The DNA testing facility on Michigan Avenue looked more like a medical spa than a laboratory. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and abstract artwork on the walls did little to calm my nerves as Emma and I sat in the waiting room 3 days after her birthday revelation. The cheerful receptionist had explained the process would be simple, just a cheek swab from each of us. But nothing about this situation felt simple anymore. Emma hadn't spoken much during the drive downtown. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline, her fingers drumming anxiously against her jeans. The past few days had been a careful dance around each other, both of us trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while the questions hung heavy in the air between us. Sarah Patterson, a lab technician in scrubs, called out, clipboard in hand. Emma winced slightly at the sound of my name, and I wondered if she was already beginning to think of me as a stranger. The actual test took less than 10 minutes. The technician explained that results would be available in 5 to 7 business days, and that we could access them through a secure online portal. As we walked back to the car, Emma finally broke her silence. I've been thinking about what happens next. If the test shows you're not my biological mother, I want to reach out to Jennifer. The name sent a chill through me. Over the past 3 days, I had found myself obsessively Googling the woman from Portland, studying her social media profiles, looking for any clues about how Emma might have ended up in my life. Jennifer's posts painted a picture of someone who seemed kind and thoughtful. She volunteered at animal shelters, posted photos of hiking trips with her son Michael, and shared articles about environmental conservation. She looked like the type of person who would make a good mother, which somehow made everything worse. Emma, I understand why you'd want to know more about her, but we should be careful about making contact until we understand the full situation. What's there to understand? If she's my birth mother and I was adopted, then Dad lied to both of us. He let you believe you gave birth to me, and he never told me I was adopted. The thought had been keeping me awake at night. David had been my husband for 12 years before he died in that car accident 2 years ago. I thought I knew everything about him. His love of old westerns, his habit of leaving coffee rings on furniture, the way he always checked the locks twice before bed. But if Emma's suspicions were correct, then the man I married had orchestrated an elaborate deception that lasted nearly 2 decades. I said there might be other explanations, though I was struggling to think of any that made sense. Emma turned to look at me directly for the first time in days. Like what? I had been asking myself the same question. Maybe there was some kind of mix-up at the hospital. Maybe the birth certificate was filled out incorrectly. Maybe... Mom, stop. Emma's voice was gentle but firm. I know you want there to be another explanation, but we both know there isn't one. The blood types, the birth certificate, the physical differences, it all points to the same conclusion. We drove the rest of the way home in silence, both lost in our own thoughts about what the next week might bring. That evening, I found myself in David's old office, something I had avoided doing much since his death. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne, and his coffee mug sat exactly where he had left it that morning 2 years ago. I had preserved the space like a shrine, unable to pack away his belongings or transform the room into something new. Now I approached his filing cabinet with a different purpose. If Emma had found one hidden document, there might be others. I started with the insurance papers where she had discovered the birth certificate, methodically going through each folder, looking for anything that might explain what happened 17 years ago. Most of the files contained exactly what I expected: car insurance policies, homeowners insurance, life insurance documents. But at the very back of the bottom drawer, wedged behind a folder of old tax returns, I found something that made my hands shake. It was a manila envelope, similar to the one Emma had shown me, but thicker. Inside were documents I had never seen before. Legal papers from an adoption agency called New Beginnings Family Services, located in Portland, Oregon. The documents were dated just weeks before Emma's birth, and they contained details that turned my understanding of my own life upside down. According to the paperwork, David had contacted the agency 6 months before Emma was born, inquiring about private adoption services for couples struggling with infertility. There were financial documents showing payments totaling nearly $40,000 made from a savings account I didn't even know existed. Most disturbing of all, there was a letter from David to the agency, written in his familiar handwriting, explaining that his wife, me, was suffering from pregnancy-related depression and memory issues, and that she had agreed to the adoption but might not remember the details clearly due to her condition. The letter was dated 3 days before Emma's birth, and reading it felt like being punched in the stomach. David had written that I was experiencing severe psychological distress and that he had been managing all the arrangements to protect her mental health during this difficult time. He requested that all communication go through him directly and that I not be contacted by the agency unless absolutely necessary. None of it was true. I had never suffered from pregnancy-related depression, I had never agreed to adopt a child, and I certainly hadn't given David permission to make these arrangements behind my back. But someone reading this letter would have every reason to believe that I was a willing participant in the adoption, just one who needed to be protected from the stress of the process. I sat in David's chair, holding the evidence of his betrayal, trying to piece together what had actually happened. The timeline was becoming clearer, but the motivations remained murky. David and I had been trying to have children for 3 years. The fertility treatments had been expensive and emotionally draining, and I remembered how defeated David had seemed after each failed attempt. But I had no idea he was secretly arranging to adopt a child while letting me believe I was finally pregnant. The most chilling document was the last one in the envelope, a medical report from a clinic in Portland, dated 2 weeks before Emma's birth, detailing a procedure called simulated pregnancy counseling, apparently a service where adoptive mothers could be prepared for bonding with their new child through hormonal treatments and psychological conditioning. According to the report, I had been scheduled for this procedure, though there was no record of me ever actually receiving it. My phone rang, startling me from my dark thoughts. Emma's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, are you okay? You've been upstairs for hours." I looked at the clock and realized it was nearly midnight. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll be down in a minute." "I made some tea if you want some. I thought maybe we could talk." I gathered the documents, unsure whether to share this new revelation with Emma immediately or wait until after we received the DNA results. The evidence I had just discovered painted David in such an unflattering light that I worried it might damage Emma's memories of the only father she had ever known. Downstairs, Emma was curled up on a couch in her pajamas, 2 steaming mugs on the coffee table beside her. She looked so young in that moment, so vulnerable that my heart ached for what this situation was putting her through. "I've been thinking about Jennifer Morrison," Emma said as I settled beside her. "I looked at her social media again tonight. She posts a lot about her son Michael, but there are some older posts from years ago that mention my angel Emma and thinking of you on your birthday. She's been remembering me every year." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I had been celebrating Emma's birthday with homemade cakes and silly traditions, another woman had been quietly marking the same day, thinking about the daughter she had given up. "Emma, I need to show you something." I pulled out the adoption agency documents, watching her face change as she read through each page. "She lied to everyone," she whispered after finishing the last document. "To you, to me, to the adoption agency. He made them think you knew about the adoption when you didn't." I nodded, feeling tears I had been holding back for days finally begin to fall. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I had no idea. If I had known you were adopted, I would have told you. I would have made sure you knew about Jennifer, about your origins. You deserved to know the truth." Emma was quiet for a long time, processing the implications of what we had discovered. "So you really thought I was your biological daughter this whole time?" "Every single day. I remember being in the delivery room, or at least I thought I did. I remember the doctor placing you in my arms for the first time, but now I'm wondering if those memories are real or if David somehow convinced me they were." "The document mentioned hormonal treatments and psychological conditioning," Emma said, pointing to the medical report. "Maybe they did something to make you believe you had given birth to me." The possibility was terrifying. If David had been willing to lie to me about something as fundamental as Emma's origins, what else might he have done? Had he drugged me? Manipulated my memories somehow? The man I had trusted with my entire life suddenly seemed like a stranger. "There's something else I need to tell you," Emma said quietly. "I didn't just find Jennifer Morrison's social media by accident. I actually created a fake profile and sent her a friend request last week. She accepted it, and we've been messaging back and forth." My heart stopped. "Emma, what did you tell her?" "I haven't told her who I am yet. I've been pretending to be a college student researching adoption stories for a sociology project. But Mom, the things she's told me," Emma's voice broke slightly. "She said giving up her daughter was the hardest thing she ever did. She was 17 and unmarried, and her parents pressured her into adoption. She said she's regretted it every day since." I felt a complicated mix of emotions: sympathy for Jennifer, anger at David, and fear about what Emma's relationship with her birth mother might mean for our own bond. She told me about the adoptive parents. She said the agency told her they were a loving couple from Chicago who had been trying to have children for years. She said she chose them specifically because the wife was described as someone who would be a devoted mother. She was talking about you, Mom, even though she didn't know you were being deceived too. The irony was devastating. Jennifer had chosen David and me to raise her daughter based on a lie, but somehow, despite the deception, I had tried to be exactly the kind of mother she had hoped I would be. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Emma looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than her 17 years old. "I'm going to wait for the DNA results. And if they confirm what we already know, I'm going to tell Jennifer the truth. I'm going to tell her that I'm Emma and that I've been looking for her." I wanted to object, to ask her to wait, to give me more time to process all of this. But I realized that Emma had already shown remarkable patience by talking to me first, by waiting for the test results instead of immediately reaching out to Jennifer. She deserved to know her birth mother, especially if I wasn't actually her mother at all. "Whatever happens," I said, taking her hand, "I want you to know that loving you and raising you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Even if it started with a lie that neither of us knew about, every moment since then has been real." Emma squeezed my hand. "I know, Mom, and no matter what the DNA test says, you'll always be the person who raised me. But I need to know where I came from. I need to understand the whole story." As we sat together in the quiet house, surrounded by 17 years of shared memories, I realized that our family was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. The DNA results would either confirm that Emma was my biological daughter, which seemed increasingly unlikely given the evidence, or they would open the door to a relationship with Jennifer Morrison that might reshape Emma's entire identity. Either way, the family David had created through lies and deception was about to face the truth. The notification email arrived on a Thursday morning while I was grading papers in the faculty lounge at Lincoln High School, where I had taught English for the past 8 years. My hands trembled as I clicked on the link to access our DNA test results, even though I already knew what they would say. The scientific confirmation felt like a formality at this point, but seeing it in black and white would make it undeniably real. Test results. Probability of maternity, 0%. The words blurred together as tears filled my eyes. 17 years of believing Emma was my biological daughter, 17 years of seeing my own features reflected in her face, 17 years of feeling that primal connection that I thought only existed between blood relatives. All of it had been built on David's elaborate lie. I closed my laptop and drove home in a daze, practicing different ways to break the news to Emma. But when I walked through the front door, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with her own laptop open, a determined expression on her face. "The results came in," I said quietly. She nodded without looking up from her screen. "I know, I got the same email. I've been sitting here for the past hour trying to figure out how to write this message." "What message?" Emma turned her laptop toward me, and I saw a draft email address to Jennifer Morrison. The subject line read, "I think I'm your daughter, Emma." I can't keep pretending to be someone else. Jennifer deserves to know that I've been lying to her, and I deserve to know what really happened when I was born. I sat down beside her and read the draft message. It was honest and straightforward, explaining who Emma really was and asking Jennifer if they could talk on the phone. At the end, Emma had written, "I don't want to disrupt your life, but I have so many questions that only you can answer." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I asked. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I've been ready since the day I found that birth certificate. The question is whether you're ready." Before I could respond, Emma clicked send. The message disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it the potential to change all of our lives forever. We didn't have to wait long for a response. Less than 20 minutes later, Emma's phone rang with a call from an Oregon number. "Emma?" The voice on the other end was shaky, disbelieving. "Is it really you?" Emma's composure cracked, and she began to cry as she answered. "Yes, it's me. I'm so sorry for lying to you about who I was. I just didn't know how to tell you." Oh my God, Jennifer repeated, and I could hear that she was crying too. "I can't believe this is happening. I've dreamed about this day for 17 years. I watched my daughter, the girl I had raised but apparently hadn't given birth to, have her first real conversation with her biological mother.
The mix of emotions I felt was indescribable. Heartbreak at losing the exclusive claim to Emma that I had never realized I was holding on to, relief that she was finally getting the answers she needed, and a deep, gnawing fear about what role I would play in Emma's life going forward. "Can we video chat?" Jennifer asked. "I need to see your face. I need to know this is real." Emma looked at me questioningly, and I nodded, even though every instinct told me I wasn't ready to meet the woman who had given birth to my daughter. We moved to the living room, and Emma positioned her laptop on the coffee table so that both of us were visible on screen. When Jennifer's face appeared, the resemblance was unmistakable. She had Emma's exact same green eyes, the same smile, even the same habit of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. Looking at them side by side was like seeing Emma's future. This is what my daughter would look like in 20 years. "You're so beautiful," Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You look exactly like I imagined you would." Emma was staring at the screen with wonder. "I have your eyes. And your nose and your smile. Oh, Emma, I have thought about you every single day since the day you were born." I felt like an intruder watching this reunion, but I also couldn't look away. This was the moment Emma had been searching for, the connection to her biological origins that I could never provide. "Jennifer," I said softly, drawing her attention to me for the first time. "I'm Sarah. I'm the one who raised Emma." Jennifer's expression grew complicated as she looked at me. "The adoption agency told me so much about you. They said you were a teacher, that you had been trying to have children for years, that you would give Emma all the love and opportunities I couldn't provide at 17. I chose you specifically because of what they told me about the kind of mother you would be." The weight of responsibility I unknowingly had carried for 17 years suddenly felt even heavier. This woman had entrusted me with her child based on information that was true, even though I didn't know I was being entrusted with anything. "I need to understand what happened," Emma said. "Why didn't Sarah know about the adoption? Why did everyone think she had given birth to me?"
Jennifer's face clouded with confusion. "What do you mean Sarah didn't know? The agency told me that both parents were fully involved in the process. Your father, David, right? He handled all the communications, but they assured me that you were both excited about the adoption." I felt sick to my stomach as the full scope of David's deception became clear. He had lied not just to me, but to Jennifer and the adoption agency as well. Everyone involved had been manipulated by his elaborate scheme. "Jennifer, I had no idea Emma was adopted until a week ago," I said. "David told me I was pregnant. I thought I gave birth to Emma at Chicago Memorial Hospital. I've believed she was my biological daughter for her entire life." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer stared at us through the screen, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing anger. "That's impossible," she finally said. "The agency wouldn't have allowed an adoption to proceed without both parents' knowledge and consent. There are laws, regulations, background checks." "We found documents in my husband's office," I explained. "He told the agency that I was suffering from pregnancy-related depression and memory issues. He convinced them that I had agreed to the adoption but needed to be protected from the stress of the process." Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, that bastard! He lied to everyone." She looked directly at me through the camera. "Sarah, I am so sorry. I would never have agreed to the adoption if I had known you weren't a willing participant. This is completely insane." Emma had been quietly listening to this exchange, and now she spoke up. "So, all three of us were victims of Dad's lies? You thought you were giving me to a loving couple who desperately wanted a child. Mom thought she had given birth to me, and I grew up not knowing any of this was happening. But how is that even possible?" Jennifer asked. "Sarah, didn't you wonder why you couldn't remember giving birth? Didn't the hospital records seem strange?"
I had been asking myself the same questions for the past week. The documents David showed me all seemed legitimate: birth certificate, hospital records, pediatric checkups. And I was so focused on being a new mother that I didn't question the details. Plus, David handled all the paperwork. He said he wanted to take care of the administrative stuff so I could focus on bonding with Emma. The agency gave me updates for the first few months: photos of Emma, reports about how well she was adjusting to her new family. David was sending them pictures and information, making it seem like everything was perfect. A horrible thought occurred to me. Jennifer, what hospital were you at when Emma was born? St. Mary's Medical Center in Portland. Why? That's what was on the birth certificate Emma found. But David told me Emma was born at Chicago Memorial Hospital. I have vivid memories of being in that delivery room. Emma looked back and forth between us. So, Mom, those memories of giving birth, they're not real? The question made my head spin. How could memories that felt so real, so fundamental to my identity as a mother, be fabricated? I remembered the pain of labor, the relief when Emma finally arrived, the overwhelming love I felt when I held her for the first time. But if Emma was born in Portland and I was in Chicago, those memories had to be false somehow. The documents mentioned psychological conditioning, I said slowly. Maybe David had me under some kind of medical supervision that created false memories. Maybe I was drugged or hypnotized or... This is like something out of a horror movie, Jennifer said, shaking her head. How could one person orchestrate something so elaborate and cruel? Over the next hour, we began to piece together the timeline of David's deception. Jennifer filled in details from her end: how she had been contacted by New Beginnings Family Services when she was 6 months pregnant, and how David had specifically requested a closed adoption with minimal contact between birth mother and adoptive parents, and how she had been assured that Emma would be going to a stable, loving home in Chicago. Meanwhile, I shared what I had discovered in David's office: the financial records showing he had emptied a savings account to pay for the adoption, the forged medical documents claiming I had psychological issues, and the correspondence with the adoption agency that painted me as an unstable but willing participant in the process. The most disturbing revelation came when Jennifer mentioned that she had received a final letter from the adoption agency 6 months after Emma's birth, informing her that the adoptive family had requested no further contact and that she should consider the adoption permanently closed. David had cut off all communication between Jennifer and the agency, ensuring that his secret would remain buried. "I tried to find you a few times over the years," Jennifer admitted to Emma. "When you turned 5 and again when you turned 10, but the agency wouldn't give me any information. They said the adoptive parents had requested complete privacy and that legally they couldn't share any details." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing everything we had learned. "So, Dad basically kidnapped me," she said finally. "He stole me from you," she looked at Jennifer, "and he stole the truth from you," she looked at me. The word kidnapped felt too strong, but I couldn't deny that David's actions had been deeply unethical and probably illegal. He had manipulated everyone involved in the adoption to serve his own desperate desire to become a father, regardless of the consequences for anyone else. "What happens now?" I asked, voicing the question that had been hanging over us all. Jennifer and Emma looked at each other through the screen, and I saw something pass between them: a recognition, a connection that I could never share. They were blood relatives meeting for the first time in 17 years, while I was suddenly the outsider in my own family. "I want to meet you in person," Emma said to Jennifer. "I want to come to Portland and see where I was born. I want to meet Michael, your son, my brother." The word brother hit me like a punch. Emma had a sibling I had never known about, a biological family that existed completely separate from the life we had built together in Chicago. "I would love that," Jennifer nodded at eagerly. "You can stay with us as long as you want,
Michael will be so excited. He's always wanted to meet his big sister. As they began making plans for Emma's trip to Portland, I felt myself becoming increasingly invisible in the conversation. This was what I had been afraid of from the moment Emma first mentioned it.
Showed me that birth certificate, that finding her biological mother would mean losing my place as her real mother. But as I watched Emma's face light up with excitement about meeting her birth family, I realized that my fears were selfish. Emma deserved to know where she came from. She deserved to have a relationship with Jennifer and Michael. And I needed to find a way to support her in that journey, even if it meant accepting that I might not always be the most important woman in her life. The flight to Portland was only 3 hours, but it felt like the longest journey of my life. Emma sat beside me in seat 14B, her excitement barely contained as she flipped through photos on her phone that Jennifer had sent. Pictures of Michael at various ages, images of their modest house in the suburbs, snapshots of the room Jennifer had prepared for Emma's visit. I watched my daughter absorb these glimpses of a life she might have lived and tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. "Look at this one," Emma said, showing me a photo of 10-year-old Michael grinning at the camera while holding a soccer trophy. "Jennifer says he's been asking about me constantly since she told him I was coming. He wants to know everything, what my favorite foods are, what music I like, whether I play any sports." I studied the boy in the photo, searching for any resemblance to Emma. He had the same dark hair, but his features were softer, more rounded. Still, there was something about his smile that reminded me of Emma when she was younger, before she started questioning everything about her identity. "He looks like a sweet kid," I said, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. "Jennifer says he's always felt like something was missing from their family, like he knew there was supposed to be another person there. What if I feel more at home with them than I do with us?" The question I had been dreading finally hung in the air between us. "Emma, this trip isn't about choosing between families. It's about understanding your whole story." But even as I said the words, I wondered if they were true. How could Emma not feel more connected to people who shared her DNA, her medical history, her genetic traits? What did I have to offer compared to that primal biological bond? When we landed at Portland International Airport, Jennifer and Michael were waiting at the baggage claim. I spotted them immediately. Jennifer's nervous energy as she scanned the crowd, Michael bouncing on his toes with excitement, both of them holding handmade signs that read, "Welcome home, Emma," in colorful markers. The moment Emma saw them, she broke into a run. The reunion was everything I had imagined and feared. Tears, laughter, and an instant recognition that seemed to bypass the 17 years they had been apart. Jennifer held Emma like she was afraid she might disappear, while Michael hung back shyly until Emma pulled him into the embrace. I approached slowly, feeling like an intruder at a private family gathering. When Jennifer finally looked up at me, her eyes were red with tears, but her smile was genuine. "Sarah, thank you so much for bringing her. I know this can't be easy for you." The acknowledgement of my sacrifice was both appreciated and painful. "She needed to come. You both deserve this." Michael stepped forward and extended his hand formally. "Mrs. Patterson, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for taking such good care of my sister." The simple courtesy from this 10-year-old boy nearly undid me completely. He called Emma his sister with such natural ease, as if she had always been part of his life, rather than a stranger he was meeting for the first time. The drive to Jennifer's house took us through neighborhoods that looked nothing like our affluent Chicago suburb. The houses were smaller, older, with gardens full of vegetables instead of ornamental flowers. Jennifer worked as a nurse at the local children's hospital, she explained, and money was always tight. But there was a warmth to the area that was immediately apparent. Neighbors waving from their porches, kids riding bikes in the street, the kind of close-knit community that seemed to be disappearing in most American cities. "This is it," Jennifer said, pulling into the driveway of a small blue house with white shutters. "It's not much, but it's home." Emma got out of the car and stood looking at the house for a long moment. "This is where I would have grown up," she said quietly. Jennifer nodded. "Your room would have been the one on the second floor, right above the kitchen. I used to sit in there when you were a baby, planning how I would decorate it when you were older." Inside, the house was exactly what I had expected. Cozy but cramped, filled with secondhand furniture and family photos.
Jennifer clearly had prepared for our visit with fresh flowers on the dining room table and the smell of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. But what struck me most was how lived in everything felt. This wasn't a house that existed for show. It was a home where a real family navigated the daily challenges of life together. "I made your favorite dinner," Jennifer told Emma, then caught herself. "Well, I made what I hope might become your favorite dinner, chicken enchiladas with homemade salsa." Emma's face lit up. "That actually is one of my favorite foods. Sarah makes them for my birthday every year." The mention of our shared tradition created an awkward moment where all three of us were reminded that Emma had already been building memories and preferences in a different family. But Jennifer recovered quickly. "Great minds think alike, I guess. Come on, let me show you around." The tour of the house was both fascinating and heartbreaking. Jennifer had kept Emma's nursery intact for the first 5 years after the adoption, she explained, hoping that somehow the placement would fall through and Emma would come home. When she finally accepted that wasn't going to happen, she had converted the room into Michael's bedroom. But she had saved everything: the crib, the mobile with dancing elephants, the rocking chair where she had planned to nurse her daughter. "I kept one thing from your nursery in my bedroom," Jennifer said, leading us down the hall. She opened her closet and pulled out a small pink blanket, soft from years in handling. "The hospital gave this to you when you were born. I used to hold it every night for the first year after you left." Emma reached out to touch the blanket, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. This was a tangible connection to her earliest days, something that linked her to the mother who had given birth to her. I had nothing equivalent to offer. No mementos from Emma's actual birth, no physical evidence of those first precious moments.
"Can I keep this?" Emma asked. "Of course. It's yours. It always has been." Michael had been trailing behind us during the house tour, and now he spoke up. "Do you want to see my room? I mean, your old room?" Emma nodded, and we followed him into a space that was clearly the bedroom of a 10-year-old boy. Sports posters on the walls, clothes scattered on the floor, a desk covered with homework and art projects. But in one corner, Jennifer had set up a small shrine of sorts, framed photos of Emma from various ages that she had somehow obtained, probably through social media stalking. "Mom's been collecting pictures of you for years," Michael explained matter-of-factly. "She prints them out and puts them in albums. Want to see?" Before anyone could object, Michael was pulling photo albums from his bookshelf. I watched Emma flip through pages of images from her own life: school pictures, birthday parties, soccer games, family vacations, all carefully preserved by a woman who had been watching her daughter grow up from afar. "How did you get all these?" Emma asked. Jennifer looked embarrassed. "Your school's website posts sports team photos. Your Facebook page was public until a few years ago. I know it sounds creepy, but I just wanted to know that you were okay, that you were happy." I thought about all the times I had posted photos of Emma online, never imagining that her birth mother might be viewing them, celebrating Emma's achievements from a distance. It was both touching and unsettling to realize that Jennifer had been a silent presence in our lives for years. That evening, over dinner, the conversation turned to more personal topics. Michael bombarded Emma with questions about her life in Chicago, what her school was like, whether she had a boyfriend, what she wanted to study in college. Jennifer asked more careful questions about her childhood, her interests, her dreams for the future. "What's your relationship like with your mom?" Jennifer asked at one point, glancing at me. "I mean, with Sarah, are you two close?" Emma considered the question carefully. "We've always been really close. Sarah's been an amazing mom. She's taught me everything I know about literature and writing. She's been to every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I couldn't have asked for a better mother." The past tense in Emma's description, has been, was, didn't escape my notice. She was already starting to think of our relationship in terms of what it used to be, rather than what it currently was. "But," Jennifer prompted gently, "but I now don't know where I fit. Sarah's not my biological mother. You're not the one who raised me. I feel like I'm caught between two different versions of myself." Jennifer reached across the table and took Emma's hand. "You don't have to choose, you know? There's no rule that says you can only have one mother. You can love Sarah for everything she's given you and still want to know me and Michael." I appreciated Jennifer's attempt to include me, but I could see the longing in her eyes when she looked at Emma. This woman had been grieving the loss of her daughter for 17 years, and now that Emma was here, sitting at her kitchen table,
it was clear that Jennifer wanted much more than occasional visits. After dinner, Emma and Michael disappeared into the living room to watch a movie, leaving Jennifer and I alone in the kitchen to clean up. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken questions and concerns. "She's remarkable," Jennifer said. "You've done an incredible job raising her. She's kind, intelligent, confident, everything I hoped she would become." "Thank you. She's been the center of my world since the day she came home with us." Jennifer nodded, but I could see her struggling with something. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take it the wrong way." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "Do you think Emma would ever consider moving here? Not permanently, necessarily, but maybe for her senior year of high school? I've missed so much of her life, and she and Michael are bonding so well. I know it's selfish, but I can't help wanting more time with her." The question I had been dreading finally arrived. Jennifer wasn't content with visits and phone calls. She wanted a real relationship with Emma, the kind that required daily proximity and shared experiences. And the most devastating part was that it wasn't an unreasonable request. She was Emma's biological mother, and she had been denied the chance to raise her daughter through no fault of her own. "That would be Emma's decision," I said carefully. "I've never tried to control her choices, and I'm not going to start now." But inside, I was screaming. The thought of Emma spending her final year of high school in Portland, building deeper bonds with Jennifer and Michael, while our relationship faded into something more distant, was almost unbearable. "I know this is hard for you," Jennifer said softly. "I can see how much you love her, but Sarah, I need you to understand I've been dreaming about having this chance for 17 years. Emma is my daughter, too." The conversation was interrupted by laughter from the living room, where Emma and Michael were clearly enjoying each other's company. Through the doorway, I could see them sharing a bowl of popcorn, Emma helping Michael with something on his tablet, both of them completely comfortable together, despite having met just hours earlier. As I watched them, I realized that Jennifer was right. Emma did belong here, in this house with these people who shared her DNA and her facial features and probably her mannerisms. The question wasn't whether Emma would choose to stay in Portland. The question was whether I would have the strength to let her go if that's what she wanted. "I know your daughter too," I said finally, "and I know you have every right to want a relationship with her. I just hope you can understand that letting go of the person who's been the most important thing in my life for 17 years isn't something I can do overnight." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to take her away from you. I just want the chance to be part of her life."
But as I looked at Emma laughing with her brother, completely absorbed in this new family dynamic, I wondered if there was really room for both of us in her future. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I started to consider the possibility that loving Emma might mean stepping aside and letting her biological family claim the place I had occupied for so long. The second day of our Portland visit began with a revelation that changed everything I thought I knew about David's deception. Jennifer had scheduled a meeting with Patricia Chen, the social worker who had handled Emma's adoption 17 years ago. She now worked as a private investigator, specializing in adoption fraud cases, and when Jennifer had contacted her about our situation, Patricia had immediately agreed to help us uncover the truth. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, a cozy place with exposed brick walls and the comforting smell of freshly ground beans. Patricia was a small woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a thick manila folder that she placed on the table between us like evidence in a criminal trial. "Before we begin," Patricia said, looking directly at me, "I want you to know that what happened to you and Emma is not unprecedented. I've seen similar cases over the years, though none quite as elaborate as what your husband orchestrated." Emma sat beside me, her notebook ready to capture every detail. She had been documenting everything since we arrived in Portland, as if creating a written record would help her make sense of her fractured identity. "I've been reviewing the case files from New Beginnings Family Services," Patricia continued, "and I found several irregularities that should have raised red flags at the time. Unfortunately, the agency was going through financial difficulties in 2008, and they were less thorough with their background checks than they should have been." She opened the folder and pulled out a series of documents I had never seen before. David first contacted the agency in February 2008, 7 months before Emma was born. At that time, he told them his wife was pregnant but suffering from severe prenatal depression and was considering giving the baby up for adoption. My heart sank as I realized how early David's lies had begun. But I wasn't pregnant in February 2008. Emma wasn't born until September. Exactly, which means David was already planning this adoption before you were even pregnant. Or, more accurately, before he had convinced you that you were pregnant. Jennifer leaned forward, her face pale. What do you mean convinced her she was pregnant? Patricia pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of a private medical clinic I had never heard of. According to these records, David arranged for Sarah to receive weekly hormone injections starting in March 2008. The clinic was told these were fertility treatments, but the hormone cocktail they were administering would have produced all the symptoms of early pregnancy: nausea, fatigue, weight gain, even the cessation of menstrual cycles. The room began to spin around me. That's impossible. I remember taking pregnancy tests. I remember seeing the doctor. The pregnancy tests were probably manipulated, Patricia said gently. There are several ways to produce false positive results. And the doctor you saw was Dr. Marcus Hoffman, who lost his medical license in 2010 for unethical practices involving fertility fraud. Emma's pen had stopped moving across her notebook. She stared at Patricia with a mixture of horror and fascination. So, Mom was never actually pregnant. No, David was using artificial hormones to make Sarah believe she was pregnant while simultaneously arranging to adopt a baby whose birth would coincide with when Sarah thought she was due to give birth. I felt like I was going to be sick. Every symptom I remembered from my pregnancy, the morning sickness, the fatigue, the growing belly, had been artificially induced by David and his corrupt doctor. The man I had trusted with my life had been systematically poisoning me for months. But how did he explain the delivery? If Sarah wasn't actually giving birth, how did she end up with Emma? Patricia turned to a new section of documents. This is where it gets particularly sinister. David had Sarah scheduled for what he told her was a routine C-section at Chicago Memorial Hospital on September 15, 2008. But according to the hospital's records, Sarah was actually admitted for what they believed was an emergency appendectomy. An appendectomy? I whispered. David told the surgical team that his wife was experiencing severe abdominal pain and that her regular doctor had recommended immediate surgery. You were put under general anesthesia, supposedly to have your appendix removed, but while you were unconscious, David flew to Portland, picked up newborn Emma from Jennifer, and returned to Chicago. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, creating a picture so disturbing that I could barely process it. So when I woke up from surgery, David presented you with Emma and told you you had given birth during the C-section. You were still recovering from anesthesia and pain medication, so your memories of the immediate post-surgery period would have been fuzzy. By the time you were fully alert, David had convinced you that Emma was your biological daughter. Emma had gone completely silent, her face drained of all color. Jennifer reached across the table and took her hand, but Emma pulled away, standing up abruptly. I need some air, she said, walking quickly toward the coffee shop's exit. I started to follow her, but Jennifer was already on her feet. She said, "Let me go. I think she needs to hear this from someone who wasn't part of David's lies, even unknowingly." Through the window, I watched Jennifer approach Emma on the sidewalk. My daughter was leaning against a brick wall, her shoulders shaking with what I assumed were tears. Jennifer spoke to her quietly, and after a few minutes, Emma allowed herself to be pulled into an embrace. "This is a lot to process," Patricia said, following my gaze, "for both of you." "I lived with this man for 12 years after Emma was born," I said, still staring out the window. "How could I not have known what he was capable of?" Sociopaths are often very skilled at compartmentalizing their behavior. David probably convinced himself that what he was doing was justified, that he was giving you the child you desperately wanted and giving Emma a better life than Jennifer could provide.
But the cost was enormous. He robbed you of your bodily autonomy, he stole Emma from Jennifer, and he built your entire family on a foundation of lies and medical fraud. When Emma and Jennifer returned to the table, Emma's eyes were red, but determined.
"I want to know everything," she said. "Every detail of what he did. I don't care how horrible it is." Patricia nodded respectfully. "There's more." After Emma's birth, David continued to manipulate the situation to maintain his secret. He forged medical records to create a fake pregnancy and delivery history for Sarah. He paid off Dr. Hoffman to provide false documentation. And he systematically isolated Sarah from any medical professionals who might have questioned the inconsistencies in her records. I thought back to those early years with Emma, remembering how David had always insisted on handling her pediatric appointments, how he had convinced me to switch to a new family doctor shortly after her birth, how he had managed all the insurance paperwork and medical records. He was covering his tracks, I realized, constantly. David also made regular payments to silence people who might have exposed him. The adoption agency received substantial donations for years after Emma's placement. Dr. Hoffman continued to receive money until his license was revoked. Even some of the hospital staff who were involved in your surgery received unexplained bonuses. Emma shook her head in disbelief. How much money did he spend on this lie? Patricia consulted her notes. Based on the financial records I've been able to trace, David spent close to $200,000 over the course of 5 years to maintain this deception, money that came from secret accounts, forged business expenses, and what appears to be embezzlement from his law firm. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. David's law firm had dissolved shortly after his death, citing financial irregularities and missing client funds. At the time, I had assumed it was just poor record-keeping after his sudden passing. Now I realize that David had been stealing money to fund his elaborate lies. There are families whose trust funds David managed who never received their full inheritance because he was using their money to pay for Emma's adoption and cover-up. The scope of his fraud extends far beyond just your family. Jennifer looked sick. How many people did he hurt to make this happen? Dozens, at least, and the psychological damage is incalculable. Sarah lost 17 years of knowing the truth about her own life. Emma grew up not knowing her biological family. Jennifer spent 17 years grieving a daughter she thought was lost forever. We sat in silence for several minutes, each of us trying to process the magnitude of David's crimes. Finally, Emma spoke up. What can we do about it now? Can we press charges? Can we get justice for what he did? Patricia's expression was sympathetic, but realistic. Unfortunately, David is dead, which limits our legal options significantly. The statute of limitations has expired on most of the fraud charges, and proving psychological manipulation that occurred 17 years ago would be extremely difficult. So he just gets away with it? Emma's voice was rising with anger. He destroys all these lives and faces no consequences? Not necessarily. There are civil remedies we can pursue. The families who lost money due to David's embezzlement may be able to recover some of their losses from his estate. And there's a possibility of filing suit against the adoption agency and Dr. Hoffman for their roles in the fraud. But I could see that Emma wasn't satisfied with the possibility of financial compensation. She wanted something that money couldn't provide. She wanted her father to be held accountable for the pain he had caused. There's something else you should know, Patricia said, pulling out one final document. I found evidence that David was planning to adopt another child. The words hit the table like a bomb. Emma and I stared at Patricia in shock, while Jennifer's face went white. What do you mean, another child? I asked. 6 months before David's death, he contacted another adoption agency, this time in California. He was inquiring about adopting a newborn for his wife who had suffered multiple miscarriages. The process was in very early stages, but it appears he was prepared to repeat this entire scheme. Emma stood up so abruptly that her chair fell backward. You mean I might have had a sibling who went through the same thing? Another stolen baby? It's possible. The agency records show that David made a substantial down payment and had begun the paperwork process. If he hadn't died in that car accident, you might have found yourself with a younger brother or sister under similarly fraudulent circumstances. The thought was almost unbearable. David hadn't just committed a one-time crime of desperation. He had been prepared to build an entire family through deception and fraud. How many children would he have stolen? How many women would he have manipulated? How many families would he have destroyed in his quest to create the perfect life? I think I understand now why the DNA test was so important to you, I said to Emma. On some level, you must have sensed that something wasn't right about our family. Emma nodded slowly. I always felt like I was missing pieces of myself. I thought it was just normal teenage identity issues, but now I realize it was deeper than that. Part of me always knew I didn't belong where I was. As we left the coffee shop that afternoon, armed with copies of all the documents Patricia had gathered, I felt like I was seeing my entire life through a new lens. Every happy memory with David was now tainted by the knowledge of what he had done to create our family. Every moment of joy with Emma was shadowed by the understanding that it had been built on someone else's pain. But looking at Emma walking beside Jennifer, seeing how naturally they moved together, I also realized something else. Despite the horrific circumstances that had brought us together, Emma had grown up loved and cared for. David's methods had been unforgivable, but the result had been 17 years of happiness for a girl who might otherwise have grown up in foster care or an unstable situation. The question now was whether that was enough to justify the pain he had caused, and whether Emma and I could find a way to move forward together despite learning that our entire relationship had been founded on lies.
3 months after our life-changing trip to Portland, Emma and I sat in the conference room of Blackwood and Associates, surrounded by lawyers, documents, and the weight of a decision that would affect countless families. The civil lawsuit against David's estate, New Beginnings Family Services, and the remaining conspirators was ready to proceed, but first we needed to give our final approval. Emma had spent the summer shuttling between Chicago and Portland, building relationships with both her families while also working with victim advocates to prepare for the legal battle ahead. She had grown up faster in these past few months than in all her previous 17 years, forced to confront truths that would have broken many adults. Before we proceed, Richard Blackwood said, arranging papers in front of him, I want to make sure you both understand what this lawsuit will entail. Once we file these papers, your story becomes public record. There will be media attention, probably extensive coverage. Your privacy will be compromised, perhaps permanently. Jennifer, who had driven down from Portland for this meeting, spoke up from across the table. What about the other victims, the families whose money David stole? We've identified 14 families who lost significant assets due to David's embezzlement from his law firm. Combined with the adoption fraud case, we're looking at potential damages in excess of $12 million. I thought about those families, people who had trusted David with their life savings, their children's college funds, their retirement accounts, only to discover that he had stolen from them to finance his elaborate deceptions. They deserved justice, even if David wasn't alive to face the consequences. There's been a development since our last meeting, Richard Blackwood said, arranging papers in front of him. I want to make sure you both understand what this lawsuit will entail. Once we file these papers, your story becomes public record. There will be media attention, probably extensive coverage. Your privacy will be compromised, perhaps permanently. Emma had been quiet throughout most of the meeting, but now she spoke with a determination that reminded me of the 17-year-old who had first confronted me with that birth certificate. I want to do it. I want to file the lawsuit, and I want to help find those other families. Emma, are you sure? This will change everything about our lives. There's no going back once this becomes public. She turned to look at me with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. Mom, I spent 17 years not knowing who I really was because Dad decided that his desires mattered more than everyone else's rights. How many other kids are living that same lie right now? How many other mothers like Jennifer are out there thinking their children are lost forever? Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. Emma's right. If we don't do this, who will? I thought about the girl who had first walked into my life as a newborn, the daughter I had raised and loved without knowing the horrible circumstances that had brought her to me. Everything I had believed about my family had been a lie, but the love between Emma and I was real. That love had survived the revelation of David's deceptions, and it would survive whatever came next.
Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. The months that followed were exactly as challenging as Richard had warned. The lawsuit made national headlines. Elaborate adoption fraud scheme spanning multiple states. Stolen babies, the dark side of private adoption. Teacher discovers husband's 17-year deception. Emma and I found ourselves in the center of a media storm that felt overwhelming and invasive. But there were unexpected benefits to going public with our story. Within weeks of the initial news coverage, we started receiving calls from other families who recognized similarities to their own situations. A woman in Texas whose husband had insisted on handling all their adoption paperwork. A couple in Florida whose adopted daughter bore no resemblance to either parent. A man in Nevada who had always wondered why his wife couldn't remember details from their child's birth. Emma took on the role of coordinating with these families, helping them access the resources they needed to investigate their own situations. She had found her purpose in the trauma that had defined her life, using her experience to help others discover their own truths. Jennifer had become a regular presence in our lives, visiting Chicago monthly and hosting Emma in Portland during school breaks. Rather than dividing Emma's loyalties, having two mothers seemed to give her a stronger sense of identity than she had ever possessed before. She was the daughter Jennifer had given birth to, and the daughter I had raised, and both relationships were equally valid and important. Michael had embraced his role as Emma's little brother with enthusiasm, calling her constantly to share stories from his soccer games and ask for advice about middle school drama. Their bond was immediate and natural, proof that some connections transcend time and circumstance. The legal proceedings moved slowly but steadily through the courts. New Beginnings Family Services was shut down permanently, its assets frozen to compensate victims. Dr. Hoffman's estate paid full restitution to all identified victims, totaling over $8 million. Several hospital administrators faced criminal charges for their roles in falsifying medical records. But the most significant outcome was the FBI's ongoing investigation, which had grown to encompass what they called Operation Family Tree, a comprehensive effort to identify and prosecute adoption fraud networks across the country. Emma's case had become the cornerstone of a much larger effort to protect vulnerable families from the kind of exploitation we had experienced.
18 months after Emma's birthday revelation, we found ourselves back in Portland for a very different kind of gathering. The FBI was hosting a conference for families affected by adoption fraud, bringing together victims, advocates, and law enforcement officials to share information and coordinate recovery efforts. Emma stood at a podium in front of more than 200 people, preparing to tell our story to an audience of families who had experienced similar trauma. She had grown into a confident young woman who could articulate the complex emotions of discovering that your entire identity was built on lies. 18 months ago, I thought I knew who I was, she began. I was Emma Patterson, daughter of Sarah and David, high school student from suburban Chicago. But on my 17th birthday, I learned that almost everything I believed about myself was false. As she continued speaking, I watched the faces in the audience, parents who had been deceived by spouses, children who had discovered their adoptions were fraudulent, siblings who had been separated by corrupt agencies. Each family's story was unique, but they all shared the common thread of having their lives destroyed by people who saw children as commodities rather than human beings. The hardest part wasn't learning that my adoptive father had lied to my adoptive mother. The hardest part was realizing that his lies had prevented me from knowing my birth mother, my brother, and my own medical history for 17 years. Every birthday Jennifer celebrated alone. Every Mother's Day she wondered if I was okay. Every milestone she missed. Those losses can never be recovered. After Emma's speech, we were approached by dozens of other families. A teenage boy who had just discovered his adoption was fraudulent and was struggling to connect with his birth parents. A woman in her 30s who had learned that her husband had bribed medical professionals to fake her pregnancy. An elderly man who had recently discovered that the children he thought were his biological grandchildren had actually been purchased through an illegal adoption ring. Each conversation reinforced our decision to go public with our story.
Without our lawsuit and the media attention it generated, these families might never have learned the truth about their own situations. That evening, Jennifer, Emma, Michael, and I had dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Columbia River. It was a scene that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years earlier. Two mothers, two children, brought together by the most traumatic circumstances, but somehow functioning as a genuine family. "I've been thinking about something," Emma said, picking at her salmon. "I want to change my name." My heart clenched, wondering if she was planning to abandon the Patterson name entirely in favor of Morrison. "What did you have in mind?" Jennifer asked, carefully. "Emma Catherine Patterson Morrison," she said, looking back and forth between us. "I don't want to give up either identity. Sarah raised me. David may have stolen me, but you both are my mothers. I want my name to reflect that." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "I think that's perfect." I reached across the table and took Emma's hand. "I think so too." As we drove back to Jennifer's house that night, Emma riding with Jennifer and Michael while I followed in our rental car, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed since that birthday morning when everything began to unravel. We had lost the comfortable fiction of our perfect nuclear family, but we had gained something more valuable, a family built on truth, choice, and genuine love rather than deception and manipulation. The legal battles would continue for years. The FBI investigation would probably uncover even more victims of adoption fraud. Our story would remain in the public eye as the case that exposed a nationwide conspiracy to exploit families desperate for children. But for the first time since Emma's 17th birthday, I felt hopeful about our future. We had survived the destruction of everything we thought we knew about ourselves, and we had emerged stronger, more honest, and more connected than we had ever been when our relationship was based on David's lies. Emma would start her senior year of high school in the fall, splitting her time between Chicago and Portland, preparing for college applications that would reflect her complex but authentic identity. Jennifer would continue her work as a nurse while also serving as an advocate for adoption reform. Michael would grow up knowing his sister, building memories that could never be stolen or falsified. And I would continue teaching, but with a new perspective on the power of truth and the importance of questioning narratives that seem too perfect to be real. My students would benefit from the lessons I had learned about resilience, family, and the courage required to face uncomfortable realities. As I pulled into Jennifer's driveway that night and watched Emma help Michael with homework on the front porch, I realized that David's greatest failure wasn't the lies he told or the laws he broke. His greatest failure was underestimating the strength of the people he sought to control. Emma had been brave enough to question her identity when inconsistencies arose. Jennifer had been persistent enough to keep searching for her daughter despite years of dead ends. And I had been strong enough to support Emma's search for truth even when it threatened everything I thought I knew about my own life. Together, we had not only survived David's deceptions, we had transformed them into a force for justice that would protect other families from experiencing the same trauma. Emma's birthday revelation had destroyed our old family, but it had also created something new and stronger, a family built on truth, choice, and the unbreakable bonds between people who choose to love each other despite impossible circumstances. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.